The land run of 1889, while not entirely unprecedented in Western history, marked the beginning of federal land distribution in Oklahoma. The legal foundation for opening the Oklahoma District, now known as the Unassigned Lands, was established in 1889 when Illinois Representative William Springer introduced an amendment to the Indian Appropriations Bill in the U.S. Congress. This amendment granted President Benjamin Harrison the authority to declare the 2-million-acre region open for settlement. According to the provisions outlined in the Homestead Act of 1862, individuals meeting the legal criteria could lay claim to 160 acres of public land. Those who resided on and improved their claim for a continuous 5-year period could then obtain an official title to the land. Harrison's proclamation of March 23, 1889, had barely dried when colonies for Oklahoma settlement began cropping up in major U.S. cities. The desire to claim a piece of the unassigned lands, affectionately known as the Oklahoma lands, wasn't limited to struggling farmers alone. Tradespeople, professionals, laborers, wealthy investors, and politicians all saw the bountiful opportunities that came with the opening of these long-anticipated Indian Territory lands. Across the nation, aspiring settlers hitched their teams to wagons, packed up their families, and loaded what little they had. Others saddled their fastest horses or hopped on trains to reach what they believed to be the most strategic entry points. The New York Herald remarked on the eve of the opening, "It's a remarkable thing that people are willing to fight harder for $500 worth of land than they would for $10,000 in cash." The unassigned lands, which had remained unoccupied after the Civil War's attempt to establish reservations for Plains Indians and various tribes, were regarded as some of the finest available public lands in the country. The nearby tribal-owned territories included the Cherokee Outlet to the north, bordering Kansas, along with the Iowa, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi reservations to the east. Additionally, the Cheyenne and Arapaho Reservation to the west would eventually become available for settlement. To the south, the Chickasaw Nation extended its territory. During the spring of 1889, the largest gatherings of aspiring settlers congregated in camps near the Kansas border towns, particularly in the railroad towns of Arkansas City and Caldwell. These camps continued to grow as people were held back by U.S. troops. Meanwhile, to the south, there were lengthy processions of wagons with white sails, making their way from Texas directly to the southern edge of the unassigned lands near Purcell in the Chickasaw Nation. From this point, many settlers headed north along the eastern border and the main, southern branch of the Canadian River, which marked the southern boundary of the target area. In the western region, groups of families, grappling with drought in the Texas Panhandle and no man's land, flocked to the boundary near Fort Reno and to the west of the Kingfisher stage station. The eager crowds at Arkansas City and Caldwell insisted and were granted the permission to commence their journey across the Cherokee Outlet on April 18th. After a rainy night, U.S. troops started guiding lengthy wagon caravans of settlers along muddy paths through the Cherokee Outlet toward their promised land. A noteworthy episode during the exodus from Arkansas City unfolded when the group reached the swollen Salt Fork of the Arkansas River. They removed boards from a nearby Santa Fe railway station and used them to create a makeshift walkway on the railroad bridge spanning the river. Settlers then unhitched their teams, pulled their wagons, and led their horses across the bridge. In Caldwell, a joyful and united gathering of around 10,000 farmers, cowboys, and former soldiers in buggies, wagons, and on horseback assisted each other in crossing the Cimarron River before establishing their ultimate camp at Buffalo Springs north of Kingfisher. On the day just before the big opening, which fell on Easter Sunday, they engaged in activities like baseball, foot races, and religious services. The spirit of camaraderie on the frontier continued into the night, with the old Army camp call of, "Oh, Joe, here's your mule," passing from one campsite to another in the darkness. Many prospective land seekers in Arkansas City had plans to travel aboard the Santa Fe Railway, which traversed the heart of the Oklahoma lands. Similarly, thousands gathered at the station in Purcell, causing a special boomer train to become packed to capacity. Railway stations located at Guthrie, Edmond, Oklahoma City, Verbeck, Moore, and Norman, which had been established when the railway was constructed in 1886 to 87, held significant potential for future town sites. Kingfisher, Although not yet a rail town, but serving as a land office location similar to Guthrie, was also a favored spot for both settlers and townsite companies. While the primary focus of the land opening was on granting agricultural allotments, many participants in the run were equally intrigued by the opportunities that arose from the establishment of towns and community governance. The Seminole Townsite and Improvement Company stood out as the most prominent among several promotional ventures that had been organized for this purpose. This entity, led by officials from the Santa Fe Railway, had the privilege of entering the Oklahoma lands ahead of others, allowing them to survey townsite plots at various stations. Furthermore, their representatives were among the first to board trains, ready to disembark and stake their claims. However, there were additional groups that conducted their own townsite surveys, resulting in the sale of conflicting town lots to prospective buyers and adding further chaos to an already tumultuous situation. This situation affected places like Oklahoma City, Edmond, and Guthrie. During the land run, certain individuals aimed to outpace others in claiming desirable homesteads by arriving ahead of time and concealing themselves until the official entry time. These early bird settlers earned the nickname Sooners. The numerous legal disputes stemming from this practice were initially settled at local land offices and subsequently by the Department of the Interior. Debates would arise over the definition of the official entry time, questioning whether it was based on sun time at noon or meridian time. In theory, U.S. troops were supposed to oversee the land rush, but in reality, the thinly staffed military forces could only monitor a small portion of the vast boundary of the Oklahoma lands. The troops accompanying the caravans from Caldwell and Arkansas City oversaw the northern line. Troops were also positioned to the west of Kingfisher and at Fort Reno. A cavalry troop from Fort Sill arrived at Purcell on the day before the run, but it was too late to prevent the settlers from spreading out to unmonitored areas, such as 7C Flats, along the eastern and southern boundaries. The largest groups of participants gathered at the boundary north of Mulhall and Guthrie, north of Kingfisher, and at Purcell. However, thousands of others converged around the Oklahoma lands at various locations, either individually or in small groups. Quite a few individuals entered the run area prematurely, joining railroad workers, carpenters, teamsters, woodcutters, soldiers, and government officials. Many of the latter were considered legal Sooners due to their government employment. Among those who took advantage of their positions, U.S. Marshals and their deputies were among the most notorious. On April 22, 1889, a clear and sunny morning greeted an estimated 50,000 individuals who had gathered around the unassigned lands. As noon drew near, both horse riders and wagons made their way to positions along the boundary, including a handful of resilient women. Due to the social norms of that era, there were relatively few African Americans at the forefront. However, many of them arrived immediately after the initial rush, rightfully earning the title 89ers. The most riveting moment arrived when, precisely at noon, starting signals reverberated from various entry points. These signals took different forms. A military officer in blue attire firing his pistol, a trumpeter sounding the call, a civilian firing a rifle into the air, or, as was the case at Fort Reno, the booming discharge of a cannon. Regardless of the method, the outcome was the same: a chaotic surge of wagons and horseback riders hurtling forward in a single heart-stopping instant. Families who remained at the boundary line cheered as husbands or fathers embarked on their wild dashes to secure their 160-acre plots. They would then ascertain the range and township by referencing the surveyor's cornerstone markers and mark their claim with a stake bearing their name and location. Some settlers immediately started minor improvements, like digging a well or arranging logs for a potential home, while others hurried to the land office to officially register their claims. The initial of 8 land rush trains departing from Arkansas City, each crammed with eager participants both inside and on top, reached the northern boundary right after the opening signal. This train made its way to Guthrie by 1:25 p.m., only to discover the newly established town was already teeming with people. Similarly, the double-engine boomer train departing from Purcell, which resembled a colossal centipede with hundreds of arms, legs, and heads, visible from all angles, pulled into Oklahoma Station at 2:10 p.m. April 22, 1889, stands as a day marked by pandemonium, enthusiasm, and sheer bedlam. Men and women were in a mad rush to secure homesteads or purchase lots in the sudden emergence of numerous new towns. An estimated 11,000 agricultural homesteads were swiftly claimed, setting the stage for numerous challenges and disputes as some individuals had to contend with others who had their sights on the same farms or lots. Several sooner contests escalated to reach the U.S. Supreme Court. One such landmark case, Smith v. Townsend, 1892, involved claimants at Edmond Station and established that Alexander Smith, a Santa Fe employee, had violated the law when he made his run from the railroad right-of-way. The High Court's decision in this case ultimately led to the loss of valuable claims in Oklahoma City and elsewhere for many old boomers, including William Couch and his family. The Oklahoma Land Run of 1889, by paving the way for non-Indian settlement in different parts of Indian Territory, promptly laid the foundation for the establishment of Oklahoma Territory through the Organic Act of 1890. This, in turn, culminated in the birth of Oklahoma as the 46th state of the United States in 1907.